the cave story starts off about a story about sleepers in a cave who go to sleep for 300 years. It says something like that.
Yeah.
Actually, the Quran is really weird how it presents it. It says, if you do you want to say anything?
I think it says 300 added 9 or something like that.
Yeah, very strange how it does that. Then it says how many people it was. They go, well, it could have been 3, maybe 4, maybe 7. Wink,
I think
wink.
it says, yeah, 3, 5, or 7, and Allah knows best, or it says Allah knows best about the number of years. And some people also know, yeah.
But isn't Allah the one revealing this knowledge?
Yeah. Why doesn't he just tell us the
Allah,
knowledge, you know?
is there another Allah? Is there 2 Allahs?
It is so weird. Why is the Quran, which is the verbatim word of Allah, why is it telling us this story and then speculating about the numbers instead of just telling us the numbers?
Right. And that's another thing that doesn't make any sense. But for some people who are wondering what we're even talking about, there is a story that was written or told, or I'm not sure if it was written down or told. Maybe it doesn't matter. But the story, I'm just going to pull it up real quick. I'm not going to show it, but I'm just reading it off Wikipedia real quick. It's his name was Jacob of Surgu, a Syrian bishop. Suru, sorry. Yeah. Thank you. And that's why I have you here. But he's told a story about 7 Christians living under the time of a pagan king in Ephesus, which is in Turkey. Mm-hmm. This is around 250 AD. So they go to a cave and they fall asleep and they pray to God and say, God, help us from these pagan wicked kings. And then 300 years later, they sleep for 300 years and they wake up and they're under the time of King Theodosius, who, if you're a history buff like me, you know that King Theodosius was a insanely fundamentalist Christian, where he literally outlawed paganism and burned down libraries and did all types of crazy stuff in the name of Christianity. Why am I telling you this story? Well, this is the story that's told in the Quran. So it's almost the same exact story. I mean, now you'll hear people say, well, it could have been a different story. Well, that's funny, because we also know from scholars that there is over 200 manuscripts in 8 different languages, from Arabic to Greek to all types of basically all the languages from the Middle Ages have a different version of the story that are pretty much the same. So this proves this is a widespread story that everyone knew. So even if this was a revelation, why is God telling a story that everyone already knows and saying this is a Muslim story?
Yeah, well, there are some speculations about this. I mean, let's come to the discrepancies first. It's sure. You said there are certain sources before the Quran or in different languages about this story. So there are certain origins of this entire story, written origins, which come from, I don't know, I'm trying to remember the years. I wrote that down, but from, I don't know, the 5th century or so, or the 4th century, where this story first originates. And then we have certain other sources in which this story is retold. And one thing that they are not sure about, so when the Christian side tells the story, one thing that Christians at that time are not entirely sure about is whether this did indeed happen or whether it didn't happen. Another thing that they are not sure about is in whose time exactly did that happen. They say it started with the time of the Decian persecution. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Where Christians were largely persecuted, and then it went on for 250 years. But the numbers don't really add up.
Yeah, that always happens when it comes to these type of.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff about this, but the Christian sources actually tell us, they tell us about this whole issue as kind of a folk story or as a fact, and they mention several details, like that the emperor required that people make sacrifices, but the Jews were exempt from this obligation, but the Christians were not exempt because the Christians were not recognized as an actual religious group. They were just seen as this little group of troublemakers.
Right.
So they were persecuted together with their with their religious authority and the people themselves. And these 7 people, according to those sources, these 7 people then flee and go to a cave and hide there. And then they fall asleep and sleep for 250 years. And when they wake up, they suddenly find themselves in a completely changed land, which has now become Christian. And of course, the emperor Theodosius at that time is totally involved in, bringing these people to light and making some great praises about that. It sounds like a bunch of propaganda.
Right.
But now we have the Muslim account. The Muslim account is found in the Quran. And there are some theories surrounding it that what probably happened, as we encountered in many different narrations about Muhammad, what probably happened is that Christians came to Muhammad and asked him about this stuff, or people who heard of these stories in the Eastern Roman Empire probably brought this information to him, or Muhammad as a merchant himself in his previous life, until he became a prophet, heard about these stories on his travel path throughout the Middle East. But he just seemed to get it entirely wrong. When you look at the Quranic account, you see that there are these religious believers in God. They are 3 or 5 or 7, nobody knows. And they went and they were persecuted because these people in their surrounding had adopted false gods whom they took as partners besides Allah. And they then asked Allah for help. They were persecuted and chased into this cave, and then they fell asleep. And they also had a dog with them, by the way, and for some reason. And they then woke up.
Did the dog live for 300 years too?
Yeah, the dog slept for that long, I think, as well. And they woke up 300 years added 9 later, according to the Quranic account. Their names are unknown. Everything about them is unknown. And then that's basically how the story goes. There are a lot of strange things about this story. And I mean, in the Christian account, you know why they are persecuted, you know who persecutes them, you know how long they have actually slept, you know how many people they were, you even have names attributed to these people. And in the Islamic account, you don't have anything. It's just some vague, strange information that is there in this Quran chapter for no specific purpose, as it seems.
And it's very strange because how long were Muslims even being persecuted in the beginning of Islam? Was that even a thing?
Very briefly, relatively, yeah.
Right. Okay. So maybe they're just trying to squeeze it in that little time period.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm trying to look at all angles here. So yes.
One of the things, funnily enough, is Islam adopts this story from the Christian accounts. If we trust the Islamic side, and if Islam depicts these figures as truthful figures who then, wake up in a land where people believe in the one true God, then we have to accept that these people were indeed true believers in the one true God, in the Islamic God, that they were persecuted in their own time, and that they woke up into a time where the belief in the one true proper God was established in their land. But we get this from the Christian sources, this story. And if you, put the things together, the puzzle pieces together, then we have 7 people who actually believe in Jesus as the Son of God and as God, who most likely believe in the Trinity, who then are persecuted by the Romans and go to sleep and wake up in a heavily Trinitarian Christian land where people are, according to the Islamic perspective, heavily involved in in idolatry and worshiping Jesus, which is heavily condemned in the Quran itself, and also described as a reason to go to hell forever and burn there forever. So
right.
It doesn't add up.
It doesn't add up. And I was just thinking about what you just said. If it's 300 years have passed by, and the Quran was written in the 7th century, so it had to be 300 years before that. So that means that, like you said, there was no Islam 300 years before the 7th century. So what were they? Were they Zoroastrians? Were they, like you said, were they Christians?
It would have to refer to Christians, but it would have to refer to Christians as truthful Christians, because Muslims have this perspective that the Christians that are around today are basically heretics and disbelievers because they believe in Jesus as their God. But there were originally at the beginning Christians who believed in the one true God and who rejected the notion that Jesus is God or Jesus is the Son of God and all that, which is very foggy. But if you want to connect this scriptural telling of these people with reality, then you have to accept that it was referring to people who did believe in Jesus as the Son of God, and who did believe in Jesus as God himself.
At the very least, he's the Son of God.
Yeah,
I mean, that's okay. So Bart Ehrman wrote a book about this.
Mhm.
In the first century, there was Christians that varied from Ebionites on the one side, and then the Pauline Marcionites on the other side. The Pauline ones are the ones that are like, screw the law, we do whatever we want as long as we believe in Jesus, we're saved. And then the Ebionites were like devout Jews who just believed in Jesus as the Messiah.
Mhm.
There is no such Muslim type Christians that existed.
Yeah.
It didn't happen. You either were, you believe at the very least that you believed was Jesus was the Son of God.
Yeah.
That has to be part of it, or you were just a heretic.
Yeah.
So then maybe they're talking about heretics. That's
Yeah.
that's your only option.
And there wouldn't be a different empire or a different land where, you know, this purely Islamic form of Christianity was established as the religion of the countries. You know, where you have Christianity emerging as the religion of the state or of the people, you have beliefs that are heretical or, you know, disbelief according to the Islamic perspective. So it doesn't make sense.
There's too many problems with it.
Yeah,
which is what we're about to see in the same book of the Quran. There's a chapter or book. How do you
chapter. Yeah.
In the same chapter, the cave, we get another story that's very similar, and it almost makes me think this writer had access to like Roman stories
Mhm.
from the Roman Empire. And here's why. So you get a couple pages later, you get to a story about this character named dhu'l,
Mhm.
which means the two-horned one. And right away, my spidey senses started tingling because I know the Alexander Greek romance, and I know all about Alexander, and I know that in not even just the Greek Alexander romance, but in other legends as well as the Shahnameh, which is the Book of the Kings in Persian, and Arrian's account. All these accounts talk about Alexander, and they you know what? Let me show up my screen. I'm going to show his routes that he took.
Mhm.
Arrian is writing this, and he's got a geographer with them, and they're drawing a map. And as you can see, this giant mountain range. This is where Alexander the Great is said to have passed through. And you notice how there's you see the two ridges?
Mhm.
They say that he passed through those two ridges. Okay, so he's going through two mountain ranges, basically on his way towards India and towards Afghanistan. This is after he leaves Babylon. Basically, his route. Everyone knows Alexander's route. I'm not just making this up. I'm not just theorizing here. This is deep scholarship. We know where he was. He left traces. They wrote stuff. They described stuff on walls, and there's all types of evidence of where Alexander was on his way to India. And the story is that Alexander the Great erected a border between where Gog and Magog is. They are mythological places, but here's where they are according to the Bible. This is according to the Catholic Bible of where the locations of Gog and Magog is. As you can see, Gog's over here, Magog's over here. But a lot of times you'll see in other maps that Gog is Europe. It doesn't really matter where it is. It's beside the point. The point is where this arrow is, where Persia is, and these arrows over here is where Alexander the Great went through, where he erected his border to keep out these barbarians, they call them. And I guess there are people who just weren't civilized. But the main reason why I show that is because there's a coin, and as you can see, there's clearly horns on his head. So everybody, now this coin was the most used coin in the ancient world. This coin was everywhere. These coins were being used from Europe down to Egypt, all the way to India. This coin was in circulation. This was like the petrodollar back then. If you need to trade, you need to use these coins. This is how the Greek Empire got its stronghold on the east. You know, circulating money and making trade routes, which is why this is what the whole purpose was. So people in an Arabic tongue referred to Alexander as Al-Sekander. It's actually Persian, actually. Al-Sekander means defender of the people. So they didn't know his real name. They just had a title for him. But if you look at the coins would show you he's the horned one. So there's really no escaping. I mean, there's no other person in history who built a wall in this location who's depicted as having horns and is known as defender of the people. This is the last thing I want to share. Place of the rising sun, which would be the mountains. If you're in that time zone, you would see the mountains rising up from like this. Here's now the sun. We know the sun doesn't actually rise. The sun is, we're revolving on the sun, but the earth is tilted in a way that the poles are like diagonal. So the sun appears, it appears to rise like this. So this is what they would see. They would see across the mountains, they see the sun. So the place of the rising sun would have to be the mountains. So it says, place of the rising sun, two mountains, Gog and Magog, erects a barrier. And obviously the Quran talks about the one true God, right? Well, here's what the Alexander Romance says. Two mountains, God of gods, sole God, he praised God. Northern boundaries, Goth and Magoth, which is Gog and Magog. Now tell me, is this not the same story or what? Like, I want to, like, seriously, how can this not be the same story?
I mean, there's a lot of debate to this and a lot of research about this. There's a lot of disagreement that emerged over the millennium, over the last centuries. There's some revisionism done. There is actually a theory that may be considered relatively new, that Dhul-Qarnayn in the Quran, the two-horned one, may not be Alexander the Great. It may be Cyrus the Great, but it's quite implausible to actually think about that. Okay, Cyrus the Great is depicted or talked of as also somebody who has, two horns on his thing.
I've seen that picture before. I've seen that picture before.
But it doesn't make sense because there's nothing else that relates that is related to Cyrus the Great in the narrative of the Quran. Whereas there is a lot of connection between the Quranic account of Dhul-Qarnayn and the legendary tellings about what Alexander the Great did. Sorry, you wanted to say something?
No, I want to throw this out there for people who want to accept Cyrus as the horned one. If you're going to accept that he's the horned one, then you also have to accept that he died by the hands of the Magog people, the Mazagati. The queen of the Mazagati, Queen Tamiris, cut off his head, King Cyrus's head, and threw it into a wine skin, filled it with his blood, and she said, "Now you'll never have to thirst for blood again." So if that's his death, then you're saying that Allah, what did Allah do to make him, like, what kind of power, what kind of wall did he build? It didn't work. That's how he died. That's what Herodotus tells us.
There is a parallel regarding Cyrus the Great and Alexander in terms of how both of these people slowly came into, or Alexander slowly was adopted into the Jewish culture as a righteous or heroic guy, whereas Cyrus the Great was already in, prior to that, known as a righteous man. Very relevant to the Bible and all that. But with Alexander the Great, it's you have these. Cyrus the Great was to the Jews just known as this guy who is like all about vanity, this big guy who has a thirst for power. But later, over time in Jewish culture, they start adopting him and turning him into a figure who is actually called a righteous Gentile in certain sources. For certain reasons, I can't exactly recall why they import him as a. Oh yeah, I think the explanation there is that he was so successful, it is not conceivable that God would let some completely wicked man enjoy these great pleasures of becoming a ruler of the world. And of course, they then associate a lot of stories, a lot of legends with Alexander the Great, and so do many other cultures. He comes into the Christian culture through the Hellenic traditions and through the Jewish traditions as a culture that people look up to, as a legendary ruler that everybody aspires to. And different cultures around the world have different accounts about Alexander the Great. We only have very recently found actual accounts of what Alexander the Great actually did, how he lived and all that. But for very many years, immediately after his death, you probably are familiar with this, stories emerged about how great he was. And these stories were they greatly varied from story to story, from century to century. Right. They added more and more things to this wonderful character known as Alexander the Great. Right. And one issue is that in many cultures, in many languages, he is described as either as Alexander or as the two-horned one, or the one with two horns. And we even have in certain accounts, in certain texts, mentions of him directly with his name, Alexander, the two-horned one, or
Yes.
Alexander was given the name the two-horned one. That's what they explicitly say.
Explicitly,
So
right.
yeah, so he was given the name the two-horned one, and he asked, and he said, "My name is this and this. Why do you call me the two-horned one?" And so these connections are explained in many sources, and these predate Islam. These predate the Quran, and in the Quran's time, when the Quran was emerging, it would already have been known throughout cultures in Europe, in the Near East, in North Africa, that this character Alexander the Great was a huge, brilliant character who is also called the two-horned ones. What's unfortunate is that people didn't actually know, how he was and the things that he actually did. They just had a lot of legends about him, and they just wanted to make him look like this fantastic, great guy, no matter how.
Yeah.
Because it feels great.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
Then you add to the fact that this coin was everywhere, so people would
yeah.
see him every day, whether they like it or not, just by seeing a coin going to the market. The horned one, he's the one that saved us from the barbarians of the north. It just matches perfectly. Now, if it is Cyrus, though, what is the difference? Like, Cyrus wasn't a Muslim; he was a Mithra worshiper, or Zoroastrian. It's hard to tell which one. Those two kind of mesh together, but it's very polytheistic in a way that you have different deities. You have Angra Manu. You have there's all these different deities. I guess you could call them angels or whatever you want, lower deities than the Ahura Mazda. But then there's Mithra, the mediator. This is not Islam. So whether you put him as Alexander or Cyrus, now you have to face the fact that this prophet of Allah was worshiping other gods. Now the whole thing becomes problematic.
Well, Muslim scholars who want to say that this is actually in reference to Cyrus, they kind of distort Zoroastrianism or Mithra, or different Iranian beliefs, because they even try to make it look like very frequently that Zoroastrianism is actually a monotheistic religion, but it's not. It is only what they mean by monotheistic is that you are supposed to worship one superior god, but that one superior god is not the only god that exists. They have a large collection of gods, and one evil god who is at the opposite of Ahura Mazda. But among those, there is not just one god, but you are supposed to worship that one god.
Right.
So that's what their beliefs are. This is very well known, and it has been preserved. So saying that it was him, and saying that it was him because of monotheism wouldn't really make sense, because it wasn't monotheism. It would be idolatry. It would be polytheism. It would be
fire worship. People were worshiping, praying to the fire. I mean, this all ties into the whole Kaaba thing, the problems with the Kaaba thing, which we're going to get into in a second. But the Zoroastrian Mithraic religions come from the Vedic line, which is from India and Tibet, where Mithra was like Mithra Varuna. And so if you're going to say that this was a true religion before Islam, then you would have to go back even farther and go to Hinduism as being the true religion in the beginning. So it all just falls apart. And Alexander was just one of the prime definitions of a pagan king. Like his text about him was he was one day worshiping Dionysus, the next day worshiping Ammon in Egypt, and then he was over here worshiping Mithra. There's no way you could say he was a worshiper of Allah. I don't even think anyone tries to make that claim.
He had a syncretic religious worldview that was based on very much what is pragmatic for his goals. It wouldn't make sense to
use the term providence above. So I think if you're going to try to make that into a pre-Islamic, it's like, okay, fine, but now you're basically in Gnosticism. Now we're just we're just painting brushes over everything. That's Islamic. Oh yeah, so is that. Like, there's too much problems with that.
As far as I remember, when you go back with the history of Zoroastrianism, as the story goes, I think this is the accepted narrative about Zoroastrianism. It is believed or thought that the character Zoroaster basically constructs this religion out of his local religion that is already in existence, but he basically turns this polytheistic religion into the religion where you only worship the righteous God who is above everything and who is the light. So this, I mean, this is a religion that comes into existence, into a form of dualism with other gods in an environment where people are polytheistic. So there is no monotheistic origin to that.
No, you're right. You can't escape that.
And so the issue with Alexander the Great, with the Quran, as you said, the Quran explains that this character is called dhu'l. People apparently ask about him. They ask Muhammad, according to the narrative, and the Quran then says, then it tries to inform Allah. Supposedly, it tries to inform Muhammad about dhu'l, the two-horned one, and coincidentally, it says things that are just so much in line with the legendary stories about Alexander the Great, such as that he was a great ruler, and Allah gave him so much, and he was a righteous man, and he
2 mountains. That's pretty specific.
Yeah. He went to the furthest west and to the furthest east. In the west, he also saw the sun setting in a muddy spring. By the way,
Right.
and then he went to a people whose language he does not understand.
Thank you. That's the big one. I forgot to mention that one.
Which is something that has been attributed to or connected with Gog and Magog prior to Islam so much, or with stories related to Gog and Magog or people around Gog and Magog so much. And then it says that they were complaining. They were between 2 mountains, and they're complaining that Gog and Magog are causing trouble and this and that. So Dhul-Qarnayn then says, okay, I will build you a wall, I'll just do this now. So he asks them for iron, and then he builds this huge wall to prevent those people from coming through. And the Quran then continues and says that this wall will be in existence for as long as Allah wants it, but one day will come when it will be torn down, and then they will basically pour through and invade all the hills of the world.
Now, this is interesting because there's actually a way to look at this as if it already happened. So this was written, we all know the Quran was written in the 7th century. A couple centuries before that, 2 centuries before that, the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, with the help of Arabs, by the way, the Moors, this was actually part of the people who got together with the Goths to invade Rome. And this is tested by all scholars that the Moors were involved heavily with helping the Goths out. They invited them into Spain, into northern Africa. That's how Alaric was the one who actually invaded Rome. He made the alliance with them at the Moors, and that's how this has all happened. So he goes. So this writer would know this story. This would be all Arabic speakers know about the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths invading Rome and taking over Rome, and even the fall of the Western Roman Empire. So I'm wondering, now I can't prove this, but I'm almost wondering if the writer is allegorizing these events, as in this wall was up, then it fell down, and then Allah caused the Eastern or the Western Roman, those wicked Christians to fall because they weren't Muslims.
The problem is, so the Quran tells this whole story. It makes reference to the future, how Allah will bring it down, and then Gog and Magog will invade the world. And to just quickly point out the parallel here, according to the legendary stories about Alexander the Great. Now, there is some dispute about when these stories came into existence and to what time the oldest manuscript refers to, but we have old manuscripts long before the time of Islam where parts of this story are scattered and found, that Alexander the Great, went there between 2 mountains and built a wall, and that these people were Gog and Magog and this and that. So we already, and that he was known as the two-horned one. We don't have I think scholars are not exactly sure if the story exactly as it is in the Quran exists before the time of the Quran, but there is enough evidence that there are manuscripts that contain several of these details that are mentioned in the Quran in a scattered way. So if you put them together, you have the story that is basically in the Quran as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it did get updated and changed, and there are later manuscripts that come after the Quran. And maybe that's, and because the version I have, he says he prayed to the sole God. It almost makes me wonder if they're that's sort of a later addition and interpolation. So that's interesting.
Yeah, what I know is that Alexander the Great was a great tool for people, and he was utilized by people, by political powers for their own purposes, to kind of say, hey, look, Alexander the Great, whom everyone admires, he did things that we would do, or he was on our side. And then they refer to invaders as Gog and Magog. For example, I think during the time of the Byzantines, the Eastern Roman Empire, they refer to certain hordes from the steppes, from beyond the Caucasians. The Turks, or an Iranian people, several Iranian people, referred to them as descendants of Gog and Magog, or they associated them with Gog and Magog. And Gog and Magog was basically used as this tool to vilify foreign tribalist people who will come for you and who will have no mercy. And throughout history, Christians throughout history associated Gog and Magog with the Huns, with the Mongols, with different forms of barbarians, and Muslims did the same. If you look at Muslim texts in the time of the great Mongol invasions of the Muslim Empire, and the Mongols were so brutal, so strong, so unstoppable, they brought the Islamic Empire to their knees. And there are texts which say that it looks like the Mongols are Gog and Magog. They are coming. It's almost over. Judgment Day will come soon. So this is this thing that they used throughout history.
Oh yeah, and even the Pope would say during the Mongol invasion, they would call like death is sweeping through the lands. Like this was it. The apocalypse is coming, and that the Mongols were like the instrument that's going to make it happen. And that was worldwide. That was widespread thought. But you mentioned something that I want to touch on that is really important, because the reason why I think this is in here in the Quran, and this is my own theory, I don't know how much I can prove this, but I think that the writer is trying to capture the minds of the eastern side of the Roman Empire by using these stories about the seven sleepers, about a story that even if he's not mentioning Alexander, it still strikes a nerve that they know this story. They're using themes that they would probably respond well to. So when I talk about this on my channel all the time, is that religion is probably the strongest form of propaganda, and it's deadly when it comes to war, because if you can get your enemy, if you can get the people, the main core population of your enemy, to align with you spiritually, emotionally, mentally, it makes it that much easier to go in and conquer those lands, because they're going to fight for you, not them.